Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Deanne Cameron. It's my absolute honor to be leading the delegation to COP27 from the Nuclear Energy Agency. We're based in Paris, France. We're part of the OECD family. We serve about 34 member countries with authoritative analysis and policy advice to support them in their ambitions and their objectives related to nuclear energy. It's a real pleasure to be invited here today to talk about the role of nuclear energy in a hydrogen economy. There is, of course, enormous excitement and momentum around the world about the potential for hydrogen to be a really important part of our net zero and future net zero world and economy. On that topic, one thing is clear, it certainly is clear to us, which is that net zero will require decarbonized hydrogen. And what's really interesting about that statement, let me say it again, net zero will require decarbonized hydrogen, is that that statement is true whether or not hydrogen succeeds as an energy storage solution for variable sources of energy. So a lot of the discussion around the world about hydrogen is about hydrogen as an energy solution. And that's really exciting. But even if that doesn't come to pass, we will still need decarbonized hydrogen because hydrogen is an important chemical feedstock. Around the world today, about 90 million tons of hydrogen is used as a chemical feedstock for various heavy industry processes, and the most significant of those is for fertilizer production. And that fertilizer production supports agricultural systems and food systems for billions of people around the world. And so it's not just about hydrogen as an energy solution, it's also hydrogen as a solution for food systems around the world. Now that production of 90 million tons of hydrogen today, which is just as a chemical feedstock, is almost exclusively produced from unabated fossil fuels. And that produces over a gigaton of carbon dioxide emissions today, which is about 3% of global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. So even before the hydrogen economy of the future that everyone's really excited about comes to be reality, we already have a pressing need to decarbonize hydrogen systems. And there are really only three ways to do that. You can do it with nuclear-produced hydrogen. That is a great way to produce decarbonized hydrogen. You can do it with grid electricity. But we know that a net zero future needs nuclear for a net zero grid. So whether you're producing hydrogen directly from nuclear or you're producing it from the grid, you're going to need nuclear. The third option, and it's an interesting option and it has a lot of potential, is to produce hydrogen from renewable sources of energy. And that has real potential for hydrogen as an energy storage vector and a solution to the energy systems challenges. But in terms of hydrogen as a chemical feedstock, including to the agricultural systems for fertilizer production, those chemical producers, they require a steady state supply. They cannot tolerate in those processes the variability that would come from producing hydrogen from variable renewables. And so that really means that nuclear has an important role to play. Now, we suspect that most of the energy ministers who are here at COP27 have received some briefing on hydrogen and the hydrogen economy. And what we would like to do now is to bring to those briefings, to bring to those conversations, the role of nuclear in a hydrogen economy. Because again, that one thing is clear to us, nuclear has an important role to play. So now I'd like to get us kicked off. Everybody has a copy of this. If you don't, there's more around the tables. Please do take them. This is the Nuclear Hydrogen Digest, We first distributed it at the Clean Energy Ministerial in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh, US, and this is our COP27 launch of the document for the climate audience. It's a really interesting piece. It brings together 12 partners from all around the world, from government, from international organizations, from the private sector, and from civil society, and it showcases a variety of different initiatives. It's not comprehensive, though. What it is it's a selection. It's a little snapshot of initiatives all over the world that gives you a flavor for how much is going on in this space. The level of excitement around the world, and the fact that it's being worked on not only in national laboratories, but there's policy work happening, there's international work happening, there's civil society work, there's industry and private sector. It's organized in 3 sections, and we'll hear about those 3 thematic discussions, three thematic topics today in the panel discussion, from vision to action, economic competitiveness, and the innovation pipeline. And so, without further ado, I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Catherine Huff, Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the Department of Energy in the United States, who requires not much more introduction, but you can come stand next to me. But I thought I would take a moment, though, because many of us, we know her by her current title and her current role, but we don't know how lucky we are to have someone so eminently qualified in this role. So I'll just tell you a little bit about her past, and I really impress upon you how the deep expertise that she brings to this role that she now plays. Prior to her current role, she served as Senior Advisor in the Office of the Secretary. Dr. Huff also led the office as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. Before joining the Department of Energy, she was an Assistant Professor in the Department for Nuclear, Plasma, and Radiological Engineering at the University of Illinois, where she led the Advanced Reactors and Fuel Cycles Research Group. She was also a Blue Waters Assistant Professor with the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, and previously postdoctoral fellow in both the Nuclear Science and Security Consortium and the Berkeley Institute for Data Science and University of California. She received her PhD and undergraduate degrees in physics from the University of Chicago, PhD in nuclear engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her research focused on modeling and simulation of advanced nuclear and fuel cycles. So we are very, very delighted to have her here today. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much. What a kind introduction. It's very sweet. You know, it really is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. I say that a lot, but, I think it truly is the case that this job is no doubt the greatest honor that I've had in my lifetime. Among all of those, this is the one where I think I can have the most impact in the world. And it's a pleasure to be with you all here, caring about the climate together as science-minded, practical individuals seeking real solutions. So it really is a pleasure, and thank you for having me. As we talk about hydrogen and nuclear's role in the process of hydrogen production and a future in which we have a hydrogen economy, I think you really introduced a lot of critical components that I'll also talk about. But I think most importantly, I'd like to sort of give a quick introduction of what the Nice Future Initiative is and how it contributes to this kind of investigation. The Nice Future Initiative is the Nuclear Innovation Clean Energy Future Initiative. It's led by the United States, Japan, and Canada, but it has involvement from 13 countries that are part of the Clean Energy Ministerial. And among its goals, it sought for a few years a flexible nuclear campaign that within it had a lot of initiatives associated with hydrogen production. And this Hydrogen Digest is among the sort of products that the Nice Future Initiative was able to support. And I'm really excited to say that, with NEA leadership, I think this digest is really accessible. It's incredibly interesting. I hope that lots of people around this conference can have access to it, and maybe we can plant them in other pavilions. I think the critical component of this, from the Office of Nuclear Energy perspective in the United States, is that we must reach President Biden's climate goals. These are our nationally determined contributions and indicate that we must have a reduction of 50 to 52% of our carbon emissions against 2005 values by 2035. I mean, or by 2030. And we have to get to zero carbon electricity by 2035 and a net zero economy by 2050. And these are incredibly aggressive goals. I don't think they can be done without an energy carrier like hydrogen. And as was noted, there are lots of things we need to decarbonize, like fertilizer, steel production, chemical production, et cetera, that hydrogen could be used as a feedstock or is already used as a feedstock. In order for us to decarbonize those things, it will need to be clean hydrogen. In the United States, 10 million of those 90 million tons of hydrogen are produced, and it is almost all natural gas reforming. And so this is certainly in line with what was shared about the world itself. In the United States, of course, the Department of Energy is really interested in our hydrogen Earthshot. So our hydrogen Earthshot is focused on getting to $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. That is 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen. And clean, we use this kind of distinguisher, clean hydrogen. It's easy to talk about green hydrogen and blue hydrogen and pink hydrogen, but in the Department of Energy, we established this policy to focus on clean hydrogen because the distinction among hydrogens, given our goal, should be how much carbon is produced per kilogram of hydrogen. And so we use that unit as a metric as to what's clean and what's not. And clean hydrogen is low carbon hydrogen for us, and that includes nuclear hydrogen. So our clean hydrogen energy Earthshot that will get to $1 per kilogram this decade will include nuclear generated hydrogen. We're abandoning these colors and focusing on the goal. We do what we measure, and we're measuring carbon per kilogram of hydrogen. We do see hydrogen as the Swiss Army knife of clean energy technologies. It's a tool that, if we can get it right, has a lot of benefits for our economies, for decarbonization, our ability to overcome climate change, and likely to transform a lot of aspects of our day-to-day life. The clean hydrogen produced from nuclear power plants and renewables and other clean sources of energy should be able to make it possible to do a lot. And especially when you combine the reduced emergency planning zones envisioned for smaller nuclear power plants, one can imagine producing hydrogen at the site of production. So if you can produce hydrogen at the site of production, you could potentially help fuel the hydrogen blast furnaces to decarbonize steel, or help to support the constant needs of an ammonia production plant or fertilizer production plant at point of use. What this also avoids is one of the critical challenges in a hydrogen economy, which is the storage and transportation of hydrogen having some real challenges with steel embrittlements and the scale and scope of transport. Moving hydrogen around is hard. You have to pressurize it into a container that won't embrittle and leak, right? But this is the smallest molecule we have, right? And so it really tends to embrittle steels. So there's a lot of work going into making sure that we can do that robustly. But if we could avoid it entirely by producing hydrogen where it's used, it really cuts down on the amount of planning we'll have to do for our hydrogen transportation infrastructure. And this is enabled by really large-scale, centralized sources of energy that can produce hydrogen. Now let's talk about energy, right? A critical component of nuclear energy is that, unlike a lot of renewables, its primary energy production is heat, not electricity, right? Wind produces electricity directly, solar produces electricity directly. Now, solar thermal produces thermal energy directly, but it's very geographically constrained. Nuclear power produces heat. And 1 gigawatt electric nuclear power plant is a 3 gigawatt thermal nuclear power plant, right? Because the conversion from thermal to electric energy is very inefficient. So let's use nuclear for what it's good at, right? Including heat production. And some heat is higher quality than other heat. So when we look at advanced reactors, this presents an incredible opportunity to leverage really high heats. So, for example, the X-Energy XE100 high-temperature gas reactor is among the advanced reactor demonstration projects that we're demonstrating this decade in the United States. It's a small, modular, high-temperature reactor with pebble fuel cooled by helium, and its outlet piping gets up to 800 degrees Celsius. Well, what does that have to do with hydrogen? Now, you can produce hydrogen in multiple ways. There's steam reforming and there's water splitting. Among water splitting, you have electrolysis systems and you've got thermochemical water splitting systems. Electrolysis systems and thermochemical water splitting systems are more efficient the hotter they run. So low temperature electrolysis has a certain level of efficiency, but high temperature electrolysis systems, perhaps solid oxide electrolyzers, are more efficient than that. And so from an energy return on investment perspective, we see real opportunity combining not just electrons with heat, but potentially, heat all on its own for thermochemical water cycles that are even more efficient than that. And so nuclear power can really harness some of the highest efficiency hydrogen production methods out there. And so we're really excited about it. In the Department of Energy, we're currently supporting 4 nuclear-coupled hydrogen demonstration projects at existing nuclear power plants. This includes the 9 Mile Point 1 megawatt electric system, a 1 to 2 megawatt electric system at Davis-Besse, and Palo Verde has a 15 to 20 megawatt electric system. These are all low-temperature electrolysis. And at Prairie Island Nuclear Power Plant, we will be demonstrating a 150 kilowatt high temperature electrolysis hydrogen production system. Now, these are very small production amounts, but they demonstrate that you can put a hydrogen production unit on site at an existing power plant. They'll go through the regulatory process, ensure safety, and they'll start to demonstrate what we would like to scale up with our hydrogen hubs. So in the Department of Energy, we also have an $8 billion initiative across the department to demonstrate multiple 6 to 10 regional hydrogen hubs. And these will pair producers of hydrogen with consumers of hydrogen. And they'll be regional, so we expect to have 6 to 10 of them. And we expect that in some regions, like the Midwest, they might focus on agriculture. And in other regions, they might focus on steel. In other regions, they might focus on transportation as their end use of hydrogen. And some, at least one, will have to be nuclear fueled because Congress said so. So we're pretty excited about those hydrogen hubs. The concept papers for those were due a few days ago on the 7th. And so we're looking forward to the movement forward on those hydrogen hubs. If these hydrogen shot goals are achieved, and if we're successful with the hydrogen hubs, I really see a future in which a hydrogen economy underpins the stability of our electric grid in the United States, decarbonizes our transportation, manufacturing, and agricultural systems in the United States, and deeply leverages the highest temperature advanced reactors as well as ordinary conventional gigawatt scale light water reactors. I'm extremely excited about it, and I think that one thing, if you walk away from this, one thing to remember is that there are very few sources of direct heat that can be used for this process that are purely clean, right? And so I think this is a special niche where nuclear can play a role and other clean energy systems may struggle. And I think we can really enable those renewable systems to do what they're best at, operate on the grid, producing electricity. But we can use nuclear-generated hydrogen to even out those variable systems and to support the heat needs of other applications. There will be water issues. Hydrogen doesn't use water and then put it back into the environment. You split water apart, and it takes a lot of water to produce kilograms of hydrogen. And so I do think that we should put our scientific minds together as we think about electrolysis and thermochemical water splitting, where we are going to get that water. And so I'll also suggest that perhaps nuclear power could be used with that special heat to desalinate the water in our oceans that is rising in order to support the fresh water that will be needed for our hydrogen economy at scale. So I know we're having a lot more exciting stuff, and I talked for a while, but I'm looking forward to this panel, so I'll turn it back over to our moderators.
Wow, what a great keynote to kick us off. That was so inspirational, so comprehensive, so cogent. And so I really have nothing to add, just a huge thank you to Dr. Huff. And now what I'd like to do is invite our moderator up for the session. Hannah Fenwick. She is leading the Nuclear for Climate Youth Delegation here at COP27. She's a senior commercial officer at the United Kingdom Nuclear National Laboratories and a scientist and a chemist by training. Hannah, please come on up.
Thank you, Deanne, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Dr. Katie Huff, for an amazing introduction to this panel on nuclear's role in the hydrogen economy. So, yes, my name is Hannah Fenwick. I'm from Scotland, from Glasgow, very proud host of COP26 last year. And I'm leading the Nuclear for Climate Youth Delegation, who comes to COP and asks decision makers and policy makers to include nuclear in their energy mixes. And we say that net zero needs nuclear. I work for the National Nuclear Laboratory in the United Kingdom, and we have invested in a hydrogen programme. We're very fortunate that in the UK and worldwide we have a vast amount of research already existing in the nuclear generated hydrogen area. Hydrogen is emerging as an alternative to fossil fuels in many applications, including heavy transport, aviation and heat-intense industry. In my organisation, the National Nuclear Laboratory, we're investing in this hydrogen programme to help the UK and the world develop the evidence base, the skills and the technology to enable both hydrogen and nuclear to come together as great fighting partners against climate change. We've helped the UK government to understand the role of nuclear in the hydrogen economy, which has supported the UK government to include nuclear more fully in their hydrogen strategy. From a technology perspective, NNL, the National Nuclear Laboratory, has a mature programme of modelling, technology development and economic and safety analysis, making it well placed for this role. The UK will demonstrate the opportunity for efficiencies of combining both the heat produced and also the electricity produced by nuclear for efficient hydrogen generation using an existing reactor in the United Kingdom. Outside of the nuclear sector, the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association in the UK has set a target to generate 40 gigawatts of hydrogen using nuclear by 2050. Matching our net zero challenge. The UK includes nuclear in its low carbon hydrogen standard. By being included in the low carbon hydrogen standard, this means that nuclear has access to subsidies, which gives us more opportunity and access to a wide market. Hydrogen, the UK policy on hydrogen includes hydrogen as a feedstock, and this opens up the market in particular to synthetic aviation fuel, which is a large opportunity to decarbonise in the transport sector. So we are here today with many amazing speakers who I'd like to ask to come to the stage. We'll move over here, and I have many wonderful questions, and we'll bring out your wonderful experience. Is this working? Is this working? Yeah, you can hear me? It's quite looks. Yeah. Hi.
Really close.
Okay. So, John, Canada is a front runner in this exciting new role for nuclear in the hydrogen economy, making a little bit of competition for other countries and organisations, including the United Kingdom. As President and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Association, past President and CEO of the Canadian Solar Industries Association, and Director on the board of the Energy Council of Canada, can you tell us more about Canada's hydrogen strategy and the role of nuclear?
Thank you so much, Hannah, and I'd be delighted to speak to that. May I say firstly, though, thanks to all of you for coming out to join us here at the Nuclear Atoms for Climate Pavilion. I'm not sure if everyone is aware, but this is the first time that the nuclear industries from many different countries around the world have had a footprint like this and combined their efforts to ensure that we have a platform here and a gathering place for great discussions about nuclear, including a very broad range of applications and partnerships in many different areas and sectors. So pleased to be here. Thank you, Deanne, from the NEA for the invitation, and Dr. Huff for making hydrogen so approachable and understandable. That was an amazing opening. So listen, Hannah, as to your question, I'm here as a Canadian, I guess, giving a bit of a Canada case study in terms of what a nation is doing with respect to nuclear and hydrogen. And let me just say something that I think all of you already appreciate, which is every nation has a different challenge based on its sectors and economy and various dynamics in terms of their pathways to a net zero future. In Canada, we already have quite a clean electricity system. It's about 82% non-emitting. But we are also a very dependent on our natural resource and heavy industry sector. So our challenge is trying to find emission reductions in these very difficult to abate sectors, which is a unique challenge and also presents a unique opportunity for hydrogen and for nuclear, of course, and especially some of the fourth generation nuclear technologies that produce high temperature heat, as Dr. Huff was explaining earlier. So that's part of the reason that Canada is so committed to producing a hydrogen-driven economy. And we have made some very aggressive commitments on that front. We've made some initial steps, which are resulting now in actual projects, large-scale projects coming to fruition. I'm going to speak about those. But I want to say, firstly, that we've taken quite a Canadian approach to how we're going to accomplish this. We're not a large nation. We're a nation of, well, we're large by landmass size, of course, but we have about 33 million people and don't have the sort of resources that could accelerate our green transition the way that other nations may have. So the secret to our success in many cases has been good planning and great collaboration and coordination between levels of government, between our nuclear regulator and industry, between the utilities themselves, and even between technologies across the country. And I think some of you may be familiar with the SMR Roadmap, which was launched by our Natural Resources Canada department, and resulted in not just a roadmap, but this extraordinary level of collaboration and cooperation, which has made Canada arguably the first mover in terms of small modular reactors, building on an incredible history of performance with large-scale reactors and our own CANDU technology over 60 years. So we have taken that template and that approach, and we have applied it to what we are calling the hydrogen strategy for Canada. Again, another initiative led by Natural Resources Canada, the equivalent of our Department of Energy, which is seeking to bring together all of the stakeholders that are involved in bringing a roadmap forward. The ambitions of this hydrogen strategy are large. We are targeting producing 30% of all end-use energy, 30% of all end-use energy coming from hydrogen as we go towards 2050. That's going to require 64,000 tons of hydrogen production per day, and it's going to require, if we went all electric, 120 gigawatts of electricity to fuel that sort of production. To put that in perspective, Bruce Power, our Bruce Power nuclear plant, one of the largest, if not the largest in the world, it would take 30 of those to produce the electricity needed to make that hydrogen conversion. So aggressive plan in place. I'm just going to touch on some of the way that the task force and the working group for nuclear is structured to give you an appreciation, and then Hannah, I guess I'll hand it back to you. But in this hydrogen strategy, Natural Resources Canada has made a national task force that involves multiple sectors like transit and mining. It involves multiple technologies like nuclear and natural gas. It involves markets and codes and regulations, human talent, the whole ecosystem. It's broken that task force into working groups. And those working groups are fed by the different sectors and interest groups. They have specifically provided one for nuclear and hydrogen, and I co-chair the Hydrogen Nuclear Task Force with someone from Natural Resources Canada. We had 70 members from our industry wanting to participate in the task force. We broke it into 5 different working groups, looking at production opportunities, technology and infrastructure, economics, finance, business models, safety, regulatory codes, and standards. Doing a deep dive into each of those areas, and we're feeding that up into the broader group. So 15 working groups altogether, however, in the overall program. And I'm pleased to say that we're making real progress as a nuclear industry, I think, if I don't mind saying, in advance of the other 14 working groups that are also concentrated on this area. Now, lastly, I will just mention some flagship things that are going on in Canada. Firstly, quite recently, the Prime Minister of Canada and the Chancellor of Germany were in Canada to announce the introduction of what is, as I understand it, going to be the largest commercial hydrogen production facility in the world on the east coast of Canada. It's going to be producing 250,000 metric tons per year of hydrogen based on offshore wind at an eastern port in Stephenville, Newfoundland. It's very aggressive in terms of the size and the timing. They expect to start producing hydrogen in 2025. We have 5 other initiatives that are underway with our utilities and using small modular reactor technologies and our large-scale reactors, including Bruce Power, who's launched a feasibility study to use large nuclear for that. So a lot of activity, and I hope based on the sort of continued collaboration and coordination that we've been able to achieve in Canada.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, John. I'm particularly excited to hear about the 70 members all lined up who obviously are very passionate that you have working in your task force now.
So the cost of production of hydrogen is only part of the story, and I would like to turn to Michelle now to discuss what is beyond this. So the Nuclear Energy Agency, OECD, NEA, just concluded a year-long study on nuclear and hydrogen. The role of nuclear power in the hydrogen economy, cost and competitiveness. So can you please share with us what are the key insights from this study?
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today to talk about nuclear, to talk about hydrogen, and to talk about how the two really can come together to meet net zero. We coordinated the Nuclear Hydrogen Digest, and I think by now you all had the opportunity to have a look at it. There are still a few at the front. Make sure you grab one if you don't have one yet. And together with that, we also published a few weeks ago a more substantive report on the economics of nuclear-produced hydrogen and what role it can play in the hydrogen economy. The starting point for that is when we look at the economics of low-carbon energy system, our work at the NEA over the last decade has focused a lot on electricity. One concept we have pioneered is on what we call system cost of electricity. And the idea is very simple, is we focus a lot on plant level cost, but as we go toward low carbon energy system, where there will be a lot more variable renewables, we need to pay much more attention to cost above plant level. Cost of introducing variable renewables, to deal with intermittence, to reinforce the grid. The work we've done in this space for electricity shows us that this cost can be very significant. If we overlook this cost, it means that policymakers can really not have the right facts to inform the decision on what policies you should take to build a low carbon economy. It also means, together with that, that sometimes the value of nuclear cannot be fully reflected. In particular, for the electricity system, understanding that nuclear provides dispatchable and flexible services to the grid that can help integrate variable renewables. I'm saying that because this core analysis of the NEA is by a large extent also applicable to the hydrogen economy. And this is what our new report really does. You hear a lot about the LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, on the electricity sector. And for hydrogen, you hear a lot about levelized cost of hydrogen. A lot of the people in this conference over the coming weeks are going to talk about the levelized cost of hydrogen production, which of course is a very important component of the cost of producing and delivering hydrogen, but it's only part of the picture. If we only focus on this, we are going to overlook all the costs of the hydrogen value chain, which will mean transporting, distributing, storing hydrogen. What we know, and Katie have pointed towards that very rightly, is that this cost, managing this hydrogen economy can be very complex, much more complex than electricity. And consequently, this cost can be very significant, and we need to pay close attention to those. Some of the core findings of our report are that, first, if we look at LCOH, we see that the cost of producing hydrogen from nuclear energy today is actually already fairly competitive. We see that nuclear can produce hydrogen at $2 to $3 per kilowatt electric, $2 to $3 per kilogram of hydrogen, leveraging on existing nuclear fleets. And that's very important because leveraging on existing nuclear reactors means that we can produce low carbon hydrogen at scale today, and making progress on action on climate today, as we will hear more broadly in this conference, is really critically important. The second key finding of our work is on this cost of delivery of hydrogen, on the value chain of the hydrogen economy. And we show that these costs can indeed be very significant. If we're talking about producing hydrogen domestically, they can add 20 to 30% to the cost, to the LCOH, the cost of producing hydrogen. But if we're talking about importing hydrogen from third countries, sometimes transporting hydrogen by ship typically, these can quickly skyrocket. It means doubling, tripling the cost of hydrogen. So they need to be really much looked at in detail and assessed so that policymakers have the right fact to inform the policy making. Another finding, and I will stop with that, and we'll have more time later, is on the innovation pipeline. We see a lot of momentum around innovation in nuclear at the moment. Dr. Huff talked about X-energy, so high-temperature gas-cooled reactors. And we also see a lot of momentum on the hydrogen space, in particular around high-temperature electrolysis. And so an important finding also of our work is that combining this momentum of innovation in the nuclear space on one hand, and in the nuclear and on the hydrogen space on the other hand, can really be key to unlock further cost reduction, and means that the full potential of nuclear in the hydrogen economy can really be leveraged so that we can make progress in this decade and in the next decade.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. It's great to hear about the future of nuclear generated hydrogen and this long vision that we have, but also that you see more in the near future, that there can be efficiencies in hydrogen generated using existing reactors, particularly with Nuclear for Climate's youth delegation. One thing that we try and push for is what can we do now? So it's good to hear about things in the near future.
So the IAEA has developed analytical tools, many different analytical tools over the past years that help assess the cost of the production of hydrogen. In the Nuclear Hydrogen Digest, it is mentioned that the IAEA now works on a roadmap to help countries engaging with nuclear and hydrogen. Henri, can you tell us a little bit more about this project and the roadmap?
Yes, thank you. And you're right that the IAEA has been working for a number of years on developing analytical tools to assess the cost of producing hydrogen from different nuclear systems and with different hydrogen production technologies. So that's only one part of our work. And another part of our work, and we will be releasing next month a publication. We've looked at the business case of producing hydrogen with existing nuclear power plants. Dr. Huff mentioned in her introduction that a number of US utilities have initiated a number of projects. There are other utilities across the world, in Europe as well, that are looking at that. But we need to take, I would say, the overview of the transformation of our energy systems from today's situation to hopefully a fully decarbonized energy system. We fully agree that we will need massive amounts of low carbon electricity, and nuclear has a role to play in producing that low carbon electricity. Our own projections in terms of nuclear capacity is more than a doubling by 2050. But actually these projections don't necessarily take into account the potential of producing hydrogen. They're more focused on electricity generation. But we will need also the other low carbon energy carriers like heat and hydrogen, and nuclear, as was pointed out, is a technology that can produce at scale all these energy vectors. Now the way the hydrogen economy is going to develop is I would say the question is in the air as to how it's going to be evolving, whether we will have more grid-based production of hydrogen connecting electrolyzers to the grid, knowing that the grids in many countries, according to their commitments and plans, should be decarbonized by, say, 2035. In that case, plugging an electrolyzer anywhere will produce low-carbon hydrogen. And then I would say the most sensible thing to do would be to bring those electrolyzers as close as possible to where hydrogen will be needed, so you don't actually need to transport hydrogen. But at the same time, nuclear has some advantages in the sense that it's a source of heat as well, and we can take advantage of that to produce hydrogen using thermal processes, high temperature steam electrolysis or thermochemical splittings. And these have the potential to be more efficient, maybe more cost efficient than low temperature electrolysis. So we need to see how the technology evolves. With a high temperature steam electrolysis coupled to a reactor, we would have to have the hydrogen production close to the reactor as well. So then there's the issue of transporting that hydrogen. So yes, you mentioned a roadmap. So we want to bring all this knowledge together, and we initiated a program, a project to bring national stakeholders to discuss their strategies and technologies, evaluate the technology readiness level of different nuclear hydrogen production, and the end goal is to produce a roadmap to help guide member states in planning their nuclear hydrogen projects. Talking about planning, there's a very, very important element, we think, and that's modeling the energy systems. Not only electricity systems, but introduce hydrogen as an energy carrier that needs to be produced, that needs to be used as feedstock for some industry, but can be used also in energy processes. So we have a number of tools at the IAEA, and we're engaging increasingly in modeling transitions to net zero with hydrogen. And actually, historically, the tool that we used, that was developed several decades ago, was used intensively to model nuclear and hydrogen, but somehow the hydrogen, wave never came. So perhaps this is the right time, and we want to be able to help member states with modeling tools as well to see how best to plan their hydrogen infrastructure.
Thank you, Henri. That sounds fantastic. It sounds like nuclear has an opportunity to ride that wave with the hydrogen economy now emerging more fully. So looking at the hydrogen value chain requires a deep understanding of the production and also the consumption sides. It requires a long-term vision for a nuclear hydrogen system. And luckily, we have on the panel Kirsty Gogan. She is the founder and managing director of TerraPraxis. And TerraPraxis has recently made a big splash with a visionary concept of a synthetic fuel gigafactory. This was presented in a report titled Missing Link to a Livable Climate: How Hydrogen-Enabled Synthetic Fuels Can Help Deliver the Paris Goals. For those that are not familiar with TerraPraxis and its work, can you tell us more about this? And in particular, what is the synthetic fuel gigafactory and why do we need it?
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. It's just been a fantastic discussion already. So, I'm here to talk a little bit about the Gigafactory, but I'm going to give you some backstory, first of all. So, at TerraPraxis, our sort of theory of change is that we need to develop alternatives to the fossil fuels that we depend on today that are as close in terms of cost and performance to those fossil fuels. So we have an analogy that we like to use called the Impossible Burger. For those of you that don't know, the Impossible Burger is a plant-based meat substitute. It looks like a burger, it tastes like a burger, it costs the same as a burger, and you can buy it in any Burger King really across America. And it doesn't require any behavior change. So we're developing sort of impossible burgers for climate, if you will. And one of the things about hydrogen is that it's going to be really useful for hydrogen users, like in refineries and in some industrial applications, if they're able to produce the hydrogen at the scale that they need and at the cost that is similar to the costs that they're paying today for the fossil fuels, if they're producing it really close to the point of use. Because the thing about hydrogen is that it's difficult to store and transport and distribute. And actually, as we've heard from our panel already, if you do produce hydrogen away from the end user and need to move it around, then you can very quickly radically increase the cost, the production cost. And I will be talking a lot about cost because it's really important that we design for those low costs. And for the hydrogen to be really useful, therefore, we would like to see it being used as an ingredient in drop-in substitute synthetic fuels. So synthetic fuels that are really, really similar to the fossil fuels that we use in liquid fuels applications, for example, in heavy transport, marine, shipping, aviation, that kind of thing. So for the hydrogen to be a useful ingredient in those synthetic fuels like ammonia or synthetic hydrocarbons, then the hydrogen will need to cost around $1 a kilogram. So that's the Earthshot goal that we heard, has been set by the Department of Energy through the Infrastructure Reduction Act in the United States. It's a really ambitious target. And fortunately, we know how to achieve really low costs in lots of other sectors. We already produce highly regulated, complex, high-performance machines using manufacturing-based models. And at TerraPraxis, we've done a lot of analysis looking at what drives the costs of nuclear energy. And we know that recent experiences in the United States and Europe we've seen high-cost outcomes and schedule delays through the traditional construction approach, combined with the need to establish skills and capability for the first time in a generation, which requires a huge amount of investment. But the really important way that we can drive down costs is by moving from a project-based delivery approach to a product-based manufacturing approach. And that's really the story of the Gigafactory. So if we could bring up the picture. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. So here it is. It's featured in this wonderful report produced by the NEA as part of the Nice Future Initiative. So thank you guys for including us there. And essentially what this is, it's a 20 gigawatt electric. That's pretty large for the nuclear industry, not that large for the oil and gas industry, sized really to be like a medium-sized refinery. It's a fully integrated manufacturing, installation and production facility. So at the back you see the grey sheds where the reactors are being made. So they're being manufactured in a factory as products, very standardized, just repeat, 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 made like a product. And then the precast concrete components are being made at the back there in that facility, and then installed in the middle of the picture there. You see the reactor farm. It has 36 high temperature reactors, which are producing hydrogen for less than $1 a kilogram. 2 million tons of hydrogen per year could be produced through the Gigafactory. In the missing link to a livable climate report, we outlined in quite a lot of detail the cost drivers for hydrogen production. And just briefly to explain that, some of those are the cost of energy that you use, firstly, is really important. That will determine the cost of hydrogen that's produced. The efficiency of the electrolyzer, and that's greatly improved by adding heat, as Dr. Huff was also brilliantly explaining. But the key thing is the capacity factor. So if your power and heat are being produced at 90% or more capacity factor, that means you're getting great value out of the investment that you're making in the other associated infrastructure, such as, in this case, the high temperature electrolyzers. So it's those cost drivers that we really paid attention to in the design of the Gigafactory. And not only could it produce 2 million tons of hydrogen per year, it could produce 5.5 million tons of ammonia, the impossible burger, especially useful maybe in the marine sector, or 50 million tons per year of synthetic hydrocarbons that we could be using in the aviation sector. These gigafactories can be located on existing brownfield coastal refinery sites, for example, helping to regenerate those communities, bring economic prosperity to those communities. There's a number of different revenue streams from the gigafactory. Once you've filled up your reactor farm, you could be then exporting your reactors to other gigafactories or to repower coal plant sites, for example. So what you've got is a factory making very low-cost reactors, producing very low-cost heat and power. And then, of course, you could be distributing the hydrogen directly to end users or making the synthetic fuels. If you were to use the Gigafactory to entirely replace the UK's current oil and gas consumption, you would need 12 of those gigafactories. Just one last thing I would mention about the water. I think this is an absolutely critical point because, as we see around this conference, water stress is a huge issue as well. And of course, you can apply, as Dr. Huff was telling us, the application of emissions-free heat from nuclear energy for really cost-effective desalination as well. And we would be able to incorporate desalination into the Gigafactory too, so that we're not taking valuable fresh water away from elsewhere. Now, just to give you an idea, the Gigafactory would need 18 million cubic meters of desalinated water per year. That's so the Sorek desalination plant, which is one of the largest desalination plants in the world, would produce enough desalinated water for 28 of these gigafactories. So, if you were to apply, again, this is the incredible thing about the high capacity factor, tiny environmental footprint, production of power and heat, you could apply it to, many of our intersecting climate challenges. So thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. I absolutely love your analogy. Your analogy on the Impossible Burger and your attitude to change is fantastic, and it sounds like it's much more relatable to people and will hopefully engage people in this change. But also the Gigafactory, what an amazing opportunity, and that must encompass quite a lot of collaboration. I'm now going to open up to the panel for a discussion, if you want to pass the microphone around with your contribution to our next question. So we can see this week at COP that there is momentum for hydrogen, and today's event also demonstrates that nuclear energy is a large part of that conversation.
So we see momentum on the technology side and on the demand side with policy frameworks, including at the international level. The climate emergency really puts this in the urgent category, and everyone feels this urgency now. So we need to make progress within this decade. This isn't a far future, this is a near future solution that we require. So in this context, do you have concerns with potential blind spots that could hamper the achievement of our objectives for low carbon hydrogen? John?
Seeing as I ended up with the mic, I'll go first, and I'll try to be rapid fire here. I saw Deanne giving us the 5-minute warning. I'm going to lift at least, I've got 3 things. I'm going to list 2 of them from the discussion that came here that occurred to me as potential blind spots. Firstly, from Dr. Huff, who was talking about the importance of moving away from colors and focusing on carbon intensity, right? We have to get away from this sort of tribalism that comes with technologies that produce the stuff and look at the actual facts, because it's only adding to the sometimes tense relationships these different technologies have. Secondly, Henri mentioned something that I think is quite important, and that is these national targets that have timelines associated with them that are so close. In Canada, we've got really aggressive targets going into 2030 for hitting certain goals in terms of decarbonizing our electricity system. This is far too short a window for nuclear to be able to deliver at its full capacity to help meet some of the optionality that we need going forward. So time limits, number 2. And the third one is just to leave you with a thought that I think is interesting to noodle anyway. This is oversimplifying it. But if we are not fast enough in terms of creating new clean electricity generation, the amount of electricity that we're sort of paradoxically going to need to produce hydrogen is only going to go up. So there's this interesting counterbalance between us succeeding at creating a lot of new electricity generation and our capacity to be able to produce the hydrogen that we need.
Thank you, John.
I'll try to be as brief as John. Couple of key points I think comes to mind. First, we talk about the urgency of action, but still in this very short time window, we need to align timelines for investment decisions. And one of the complexity of hydrogen is that you need to bring together new player on the supply side. We need to develop the electrolyzers industry, and we need to bring all of the industry that currently often rely on steam methane reforming to make investment decisions to shift the processes so that they can rely on low carbon hydrogen based on low carbon hydrogen based on electrolysis. And so, it's going to take a lot of energy to bring all these different players together so that these crucial investment decisions are made in the coming years. And I think, what we heard from Canada is that it takes a lot of work at all levels of government to make it happen. The other blind spot which worries us at the NEA is on making sure that we have a policy framework that focuses on the overarching objective, which is producing low carbon hydrogen. And we see in some part of the world that sometimes we get distracted by focusing a lot of our energy on color-coding hydrogen, understanding what it means, which move us away, sometimes completely, from the supposed outcome, which is producing low carbon hydrogen. In Europe, for instance, we see a lot of policy schemes to label what will be green hydrogen, sometimes leveraging on viable renewables, where you have certification schemes, which means that you'll be able to produce electricity with geothermal in Iceland, for instance, and then use it in Spain to say, I have this green renewable certificate, I'm producing green hydrogen, here we go. This is not going to work. And so we really need to make sure that our policy are focused on the overarching objective, which is producing low carbon hydrogen.
Thank you, Michelle. And Henri?
So I agree also with what was mentioned before, the issue of the the color of the hydrogen, or I would say the labeling of hydrogen. And this is an important driver for business decisions. Yesterday here on this pavilion we had two panels to discuss financing of nuclear, taxonomies, and it is very important for the business and the industry to have clarity on what will be eligible for green financing, and whether hydrogen produced from nuclear fits or not into those criteria. The other point, I think, is that is maybe a cause of uncertainty, is the comparative market value of electricity versus hydrogen. When we embarked on the study on business case for producing hydrogen with existing nuclear power plants, there was an issue of improving the revenue streams of utilities with very low electricity market prices. With today's energy crisis in many parts of the world, electricity prices are really high. I'm not sure utilities would want to produce hydrogen. They would probably want to sell electricity on the market. So, of course, we're in a sort of special situation, but I think we need to understand a little bit more the future dynamics of the market values of those two commodities.
Thank you, Michelle. And Kirsty.
Thank you. So, okay, 3 very quick points. One, we really need drop-in substitute fuels for parts of the economy that are not easy to electrify. And for that, we're going to need very large-scale production of very low-cost hydrogen. Number 2, the gigafactory can actually also be connected to the grid and could be, used to support future electricity grids with high penetrations of variable renewables, particularly for seasonal lulls. Could be incredibly valuable for our future electricity grids to have that available for those short periods of time, maybe a week or even some number of weeks. And the third thing to say is that nuclear hydrogen is green hydrogen.
Thank you so much, Kirsty, and everybody on the panel. I'll pass over to Deanne for closing remarks. Thank you.
Please join me in giving a huge thank you to Dr. Katie Huff from the U.S. Department of Energy, Hannah Fenwick from the Young Generation and UK Nuclear National Laboratories, NNL, John Gorman, Canadian Nuclear Association, Michel Berthelemy, Nuclear Energy Agency, Henri Payet, International Atomic Energy Agency, and Kirsty Gogan from Terra Praxis. All of the initiatives that we heard about today, which were very interesting, are featured in the digest with very convenient QR codes, along with a number of other stories that really give a picture of the vast and interesting, exciting range of initiatives that are taking place around the world. Thank you all.